First-person shooters have never been my favourite game genre. Yet Halo was one of my favourite childhood games. I've struggled to get into Doom, Call of Duty, even Metroid Prime, but Halo appealed to me in a way that those games didn't. Was it because of the story and setting, the gunplay, the oddly adorable grunts? Or was there some other special sauce that made this game so enduring? In this video, I will replay the campaign that started it all to try and find out. I'm going to discuss every level, saying what I think the game gets right and where I think it blows itself up with its own rocket launcher. By the end, we will have figured out what made Halo's campaign so unique, and died many times trying. I say the campaign that started it all, but strictly speaking, I will be playing the anniversary campaign as it appears in the Master Chief Collection, which besides some audio-visual updates is mostly identical to the original campaign. If you're new here, maybe click subscribe. I mean, no pressure, but I am close friends with Master Chief, and he is very good in a fight. My name's Lord Sparrow. I'm wanted in every American state, even the one they don't want you to know about. And this is why I think Halo's campaign is so uniquely memorable. The game opens with the Pillar of Autumn flying towards some giant Halo-shaped megastructure. The Autumn is a cruiser operated by the UNSC, or United Nations Space Command. Captain Keyes is speaking with Cortana, and they seem to be on the run from someone or something. Could it be the police? Space Mormons? An angry ex-lover of Captain Keyes? It's left completely ambiguous. Also, because the ship AI is called Cortana, is my headcanon that the UNSC ships all run off Windows 10? Keyes says to Cortana to give our friends a warm welcome, and to have everyone go to Combat Alert Alpha. We see the UNSC getting prepped, in a small scene which establishes the UNSC's military capability, whilst also teasing to the player the type of vehicles they will get to use in the game. There's some subtle foreshadowing in this scene, though we won't know it until we hit the endgame. Sergeant Johnson here says that the guys we're about to fight are called the Covenant, so we were running from Space Mormons then. His small speech to the troops gives an insight into both Johnson and the UNSC. They have a very hoorah attitude to conflict. We then transition to seeing Master Chief being awakened from cryosleep. I know Chief is in a cryopod, but I like to think he just finished getting his suntan. After telling us how attractive we are, the techies proceed to calibrate our suit and get us up and running. We're what's called a Spartan, a genetically engineered super soldier and the UNSC's trump card in the war against the Covenant, so it's very important that we're combat ready as quick as possible. This sequence serves as our basic movement tutorial for the game. This section where we have to move the camera to look at lights may seem unnecessary, but it's worth noting that Halo was originally a console-exclusive shooter. Most FPS games were on PC, where the primary control input was a keyboard and mouse. Mouse controls allow for more precise camera and aiming controls than a controller stick does, so this sequence allows players accustomed to mouse controls time to get acquainted with their right analog stick. I did, however, play with a mouse and keyboard, as most players nowadays would choose to play an FPS with a mouse over a controller. We finished calibrating our suit, and the guys are very nonchalant about this whole invasion thing. They're talking about getting to the evac group like they would talk about going on a lunch break. Maybe this Covenant aren't that big a threat? Never mind. The other techie leads us into a corridor which promptly explodes, killing him. He does a full somersault upon death. The Halo games have always had crazy ragdoll physics for explosions, and whilst this one here was pretty janky, they do a lot to add to the chaotic feeling of a battle. They're also often just very funny. We then have to walk to the bridge. We're unarmed at this point and so can't engage in combat. There's this one moment where we open a door and an elite is standing right there. I try to melee him, but I can't as I have no weapon, despite being a 7-foot super soldier. The Halo games have always had a bit of a disconnect between what Spartans are capable of in the lore compared to the game. This disconnect narrows in later games as the player gets more abilities, but it's worth bringing up that Master Chief would be more than capable of taking down, or at least holding his own against, enemies with his bare fists. Still, this is also the first piece of Halo media ever released, and a new player wouldn't necessarily have this frame of reference going into the game. So I'm going to give this sequence a pass on those grounds, as well as the way it gives the player time to adjust to playing an FPS on a controller that I mentioned earlier. We make it to the bridge, which is just around the corner from a firefight, meaning the Covenant have made a heck of a lot of ground in a very short period of time. Despite this, nobody is really speaking with any sense of urgency. People are dying in the corridor, and we're here joking about how bad Cortana's driving skills are. I say that like it's a criticism, but it's not. This is a deliberate tonal choice. The majority of the game has a light-hearted, almost cartoony tone to it. From the hoorah attitude of the Marines to the cowardly screams of the Covenant grunts, Halo never seems to take itself too seriously, at least at a cursory glance. The truth's a bit more complicated, but we'll discuss that later. For now, the light-hearted tone contributes to the game's distinct identity and unique charm. Keyes tells us to take Cortana and get to an evacuation pod. If Cortana falls into the Covenant hands, it would tell them everything about the UNSC, including the location of Earth. The writing of this scene is really solid on the whole. A lot of exposition and information is given here, but it never feels forced or out of character. For example, there's this one line where Cortana says that this war already has enough dead heroes. This single line tells us that the war with the Covenant has been going on for a while, that many have already died, and the UNSC attitude towards the fallen is one of reverence. But it's also a sassy rebuttal to Keyes' plan to land the Autumn on the halo-shaped thingy-majig, which tells us Cortana has a comfortable working relationship with Keyes, that she doesn't seem interested in treating anyone differently based on rank, and also genuinely cares about Keyes' well-being. The game will get a bit clunkier with how it delivers some exposition as the game goes on, but for now, I'm enthralled. Keyes gives us his Magnum, but says that he doesn't keep it loaded, so presumably he just carries around a lethal weapon as a fashion accessory, which is oddly very in character. We have to fight our way through to the evacuation pods, in a sequence which serves as our combat tutorial. Combat itself is simple. If your targeting reticle goes red, fire your gun at the alien. If it's not red, then it's a friendly. Unless it's Jim. Jim owes me money. The combat zones in this level are confined, which means both you and the Covenant don't have a lot of space to move. This makes it easier for you to hit the enemy, but also encourages you to engage the enemy head-on instead of running and dodging. This subtly forces you to improve your gunplay before getting to the bulk of the game, and prepares you to become humanity's saviour. Master Chief has 2 health bars, a shield which will recharge after a few seconds of not taking damage, and a health bar which only refills through health pickups. This system has several implications, almost all of which are positive. For one, it allows the player to take a lot of damage and not immediately die as a punishment for imperfect gameplay. Mostly. Heavy weapons and grenades will instantly kill you, and a charged plasma pistol will wipe out your shields, but often the punishment for taking damage isn't immediate death, but rather being forced to retreat so you can recharge your shields. This need to retreat and recharge creates an ebb and flow to combat encounters. The power dynamic between you and your enemy depends on how charged your shields are. If you're out of shields, you still have your health bar, but that doesn't recharge and thus is a limited resource. The player then has to make an active choice. Do I retreat to conserve my health, or do I take some damage to take out the enemy in front of me? Sometimes retreat will be impossible, creating tense last stands where you desperately try to kill the enemy before they kill you. You're also the only character in the game with a recharging shield, which does a lot to make you feel like the most powerful thing in the room, which lore-wise you often are. Overall, I'm a big fan of this system. There's a small sequence where you appear behind enemies, and the game teaches you that it is possible to stealthily get the drop on enemies. Emphasis on possible, because I'm about as stealthy as a brick to the face. The game also introduces several new weapons to commit xenocide with. The first is the Magnum, the famous scope-capable scopeless pistol. It does a lot of damage if you hit a headshot, and is genuinely considered one of the best weapons in the game for its solid damage and rate of fire. The second is the classic assault rifle. I found this weapon was best at weakening an enemy, as I closed in to finish them off with a melee kill. It doesn't have the highest damage output, but each level often provides plentiful ammo for the weapon. But it's not just human weapons that are up for grabs. One of Halo's unique features is that you can pick up enemy weapons from the recently deceased and use it against their friends. The first example of this is the plasma rifle. Higher damage output than the assault rifle, but it overheats if you fire it for too long. Ammo for the weapon is sparse too, as you can't refill the ammo by picking it off enemy corpses. Instead, you need to swap to another plasma rifle, which is frankly just a bit annoying. I found it was best used to deal with high priority targets before swapping to something else. I didn't use it until a later level, but you can also pick up the plasma pistol here. Seemingly weak, its standard fire does a piddly amount of damage. However, this belies its true strength, which comes from its charge shot. Holding the fire button down charges energy which, when released, fires a homing bullet that absolutely tears through enemy shields. It's a situational weapon, but I love how it fulfills a specific use. And I think that's my favourite thing about the weapons in Halo. Each one lends itself to a distinct playstyle. Most weapons are available in most levels after their first appearance, and this means there's a lot of variety to how we can approach combat encounters. You can also melee attack enemies, which does a lot of damage but comes at the cost of having to get up close and personal with the angry snarling alien who's currently trying to rip your face off. It was my preferred way to deal with a lot of weaker enemies, even if it got me killed a lot. It's not all sunshine and headshots though. I do have a couple of small complaints. One is to do with the design of this level specifically. Because all of the corridors are quite samey, there were a couple of situations where I got a bit lost. Halo 1's campaign reuses a lot of architecture throughout. It's an old game and the first in the series, so this isn't surprising. But later levels get better at designing around this limitation to ensure the player doesn't get lost. The other issue is that the game uses icons to tell you what weapon you'll be picking up. This is less an issue for human weapons, where our lived experience gives us a frame of reference to what the icon represents. But for a first-time player, some of the alien weapon icons could be initially confusing. This is again very much a nitpick, and goes away quickly after some experience with the game, but is worth noting nonetheless. We fight our way through to the last evacuation pod and get clear of the ship. This guy says he doesn't want to die, jinxing us and guaranteeing that something's going to go horribly wrong. Great job, asshole. Sure enough, the pod crash lands on the Halo-like space building, and we are the sole survivor. Narrative tropes, the leading cause of death for nameless Marines everywhere. We leave the ship and take in our lush surroundings, but there's no time to gaze out and wonder. Cortana says the Covenant is on their way and she recommends avoiding them. I've always liked it when Halo contextualizes its enemy placements. For example, a dropship and a Banshee will appear here to scout out our evacuation pod. They've been sent here for a specific strategic purpose, to eradicate UNSC survivors. Moments like this, when we see the troop movements of the Covenant and the UNSC firsthand, help to make us feel like we're a part of a grander military operation. This in turn makes both the UNSC and Covenant feel like distinct entities, with their own motivations and tactics. It's excellent world building and very immersive. The feeling of being a part of something bigger than myself is one of the major reasons Halo appealed to me where other first-person shooters didn't. We evade the Covenant and meet up with Sergeant Johnson and some Marines who have forgotten how to use a building for cover. We defeat waves of Covenant. And see more evacuation pods flying overhead. We're going to have to get to them quickly if they're going to have any chance of surviving the Covenant, so we tell the Pelican to give us its Warthog and introduce us to vehicles. Vehicles add gameplay variety to the campaign, and allow for larger scale maps with more entities, which in turn gives the battles on those maps a grander feel. There's not too many vehicles in Halo 1, and their functionality gets expanded in later games, but their presence still adds variety here. The Warthog is the quintessential Halo vehicle, a 4-wheel drive all-terrain vehicle which is reasonably easy to control, which is a good thing because I forged my driving license. The Warthog has 3 seats which offer different utilities. The driver's seat drives the vehicle, no surprise there. The person riding shotgun can fire whatever weapon they're holding at the time. Finally, there's a manually operated machine gun turret on the back. I find the AI will sometimes spray bullets wildly at the target when using the turret, which is to say that they have a slightly higher shot accuracy than I do. When working as a team, the 3 operators can do a heck of a lot of damage, very, very quickly. After navigating some corridors with tight turns to get us used to handling the vehicle, we rendezvous with the 3 squads whose pods we saw earlier. They're being rudely attacked by the Covenant, so we have to clear them out before the Pelican can come and pick them up. After the final fight, a couple of odd things happened to me. Firstly, this Marine decided that he's not going to join us on the Pelican, and that he wants to settle down here, maybe start a family, and lead a new life. Whilst this would normally be considered desertion, I chose to respect his decision. I'm sure nothing bad will happen to him. The second is that I recreated the final scene of the Italian job with my Warthog driving. I'm still able to save it though. Overall, this level is an excellent introduction to the Warthog. The Warthog's multi-seat designs has obvious multiplayer applications, but even in single player, it contributes to this idea that you're part of a team, an army, and that you're all fighting the Covenant together. In this level, I also used the Needler for the first time. This is one of my favourite weapons. It fires shots that have a limited homing capability, which is great for me because whilst my aim is godlike, the god in question happens to be blind. Once a shot connects with a target, it stays in their body for a couple of seconds. If enough shots connect in that time frame, they will explode. I absolutely love this weapon. We get a report that Captain Keyes is being held prisoner on a Covenant cruiser, and so our next mission is to go and rescue him. Tonight, there's going to be a jailbreak. In the next level, we get given a sniper rifle. The weapon behaves as you would expect. You can zoom down the scope to precisely aim at enemies several meters away, or no-scope enemies to briefly feel like a #MLG gamer. There's not much to say beyond how it further expands Halo's playstyle variety. We're accompanied by several Marines. We're told that we will take point, try to stealthily pick off as many enemies as possible before the Marines come in and clear up. Predictably, stealth lasts for all of 2 seconds before all hell breaks loose. Fortunately, the Marines can actually hold their own in a fight, at least against the Covenant. They proactively attack and defend themselves. When they die, it's generally because they were overwhelmed by the enemy or just got unlucky. Several games make AI-controlled companions powerless, or incapable of killing enemies outright to make the player character feel incredibly powerful. It's a very understandable decision, but I've always respected games that allow the AI to be meaningfully helpful to the player. It actually makes me care a bit when they die. Not too much, mind you. I won't be attending their funeral. Static gun turrets are introduced in this level, and we can board them to mow down enemies. At one point, a grunt threw a grenade behind the turret I was in. This caused the turret to flip, launching me into the air towards the enemy, which felt awesome. Halo's physics have always been a little loose and wacky, most notably in the amount of ragdoll an explosion will cause. That sounds like a negative, and it certainly allows for some janky things to happen. But it also allows for unique interactions between separate elements, in this case a grenade and a gun turret, to happen completely organically. There have been numerous times where these interactions have led to fun, once-in-a-blue-moon moments that persist in the player's mind long after they've happened. For me at least, this heavily contributes to Halo's overall memorability. I also want to talk here about the Covenant enemy types, as this is the first level where we face off against every one of their archetypes. First up, we have the Grunts. Whilst they seem tiny to us, they're not actually that much smaller than your average Marine. They're the most numerous and arguably weakest of the Covenant forces, but don't be fooled into thinking they're powerless. Most of them have plasma grenades which will instantly kill any creature they stick to, including you. And some later ones carry powerful fuel rod cannons, which do massive damage and self-destruct when the owner dies. I really like the skeletal design of the Grunts. They have large circular heads, and their height roughly comes to where your targeting reticle rests when you're looking dead ahead. This means that it's incredibly easy to get headshots without much need for precision, which in turn sells the feeling that we're so much more powerful than them. The Jackals come next. These enemies are more thin and wily than the Grunts, but their defining feature comes from the massive energy shield that they carry. This shield protects them from bullets until it is broken, meaning that you have to switch up your tactics to get around it. You can shoot their hand if you're precise enough to cause them to drop their shield, leaving them vulnerable to a follow-up, or you can close the distance and punch them in the face. The elites are tall and strong, and each one is more than capable of dealing with a Spartan if you let your guard down. They can dodge your attacks with sidesteps that double as killer dance moves in the Covenant's nightclubs. They're more than happy to stand their ground and even run in for a fistfight with the Master Chief. Their high maneuverability challenges both the player's ability to aim, but also your positioning. An elite charging at you forces you to choose whether to hold your ground or retreat somewhere else. Individually, each type of enemy challenges a different part of your skill set, but enemies are almost always deployed as a unit. This means the player has to deal with every element of their skill set being tested in each encounter, and constantly switch up their strategies on a second-by-second basis to effectively annihilate the enemy. This keeps combat from becoming a monotonous slog, which is a good thing when your entire branding revolves around how you've evolved combat. Darwin would be proud. There's one more Covenant enemy type, and it's waiting for us at the gravity lift. I believe that I've killed every enemy, so I step onto the gravity lift. I look up, and the most intimidating sight greets me.
Oh no!
These are Hunters, the final Covenant enemy type. They're incredibly tough, and are armoured from head to toe. They have a highly damaging melee attack, and a fuel rod cannon that fires explosive rounds that causes humans to stop existing when they touch it. However, introducing this enemy type here is incredibly clever. You see, their one big weakness is that there's a massive hole in their armour on their back. Because Marines accompany you for this fight, it's likely that the Hunters will get distracted murdering the chumps and turn their backs to you, showing you their exposed backs and allowing you to figure out where to shoot them. It expertly teaches the player how to kill the Hunters without the need for a single tutorial prompt. It also helps that this Hunter shot his blood brother in the back. Whoopsie. We take the gravity lift and board the cruiser. It's quiet. Too quiet. One of the Marines asks if we think there's no one home, which sounds like the setup to a funny death. It almost is, as cloaked elites open the door and ambush us. I'm able to ruin the punchline by shooting the elites before he can kill anyone, but these Marines should really learn to keep their mouths shut. Which brings me on to another point. There are quite a few levels where Marines will accompany you, but they can die at any point in the level for any reason. Sometimes they will survive throughout the entire level, with every fight being a squad-on-squad deathmatch. Sometimes they will die to the first grunt they see. It means that each playthrough of a level will be different, the narrative told within altering each time. It's an excellent example of both emergent gameplay and emergent storytelling, and is another one of the major reasons I remember the Halo games so fondly. This level sees us dealing with larger numbers of tougher Covenant troops, including elites with energy swords, which are super effective against my face. Try as we might, only one Marine makes it to the bridge of the Covenant cruiser. He says that he will hold down the fort and that we should carry on to find Captain Keyes. Now, I know this scene looks particularly silly because there's only one Marine left, but even if the whole squad survived, I would question the tactical efficacy of this. We're deep in enemy territory, cut off from supply lines, and surrounded by enemies constantly. There's no way a single squad of Marines will be able to hold any territory under those circumstances. Now, I know the reason this happens is so the player is forced to deal with the next few fights alone, but nevertheless the excuse given seems contrived. Still, we leave this brave soldier alone on the bridge of the murder alien spaceship. Further into the cruiser we find some prison cells with dead Marines in. Keyes isn't here, but an active camouflage pickup is. For a short time, this power-up will make you completely invisible to enemies until you start fighting them, allowing you to engage enemies on your terms. This allows me to sneak behind and quickly kill. This allows me to get the drop on the elite with the energy sword, taking him out before he can take me out. There's also an overshield in this level. This adds 2 extra bars of shields to your shield gauge. These bars don't recharge when they're damaged, but last permanently until they're gone. It's really cool how you can turn the Covenant's equipment against them. It means that every Covenant enemy doubles as a tactical opportunity, and turning the enemy's arsenal against them creates this feeling that I'm a walking armory. There's a few weapons that you can't take from enemies. The energy swords and fuel rod cannons self-destruct after their wielder dies, but later games will remove these restrictions. There's always a reward for taking down enemies, which encourages you to engage in fights rather than run right past them. We save Keyes and he says that he overheard the Covenant talking about something called Halo. Ah gee, I wonder what that could be. Well, Cortana then does something kind of strange. She casually accesses the Covenant BattleNet and looks for communications regarding Halo. She reveals that it's a weapon of some kind, one with vast, unimaginable power. Now, the nature of Halo is all well and good, but I'm not a fan of how she learned about it. The ability to access the entire Covenant BattleNet is an incredibly powerful one, which I don't think the writers fully thought out. The game never specifies if the Covenant BattleNet is a complete library of Covenant information, or just the name of their WhatsApp group chat. If it's the former, she could theoretically see all Covenant secret projects, troop movements, settlements, and plans on a galactic scale. Humanity would know about any Covenant invasion months before it happened. Even if it's the latter, it's still an incredibly powerful ability. Wars are won on information, and being able to coordinate UNSC troop movements to counter every Covenant movement would make defeat nigh impossible for a competent commander. Okay, so Editor Sparrow here. When watching the footage back, I found that Cortana does mention that the Covenant are only broadcasting tactical data on an unencrypted channel. So whilst the exact nature of the Covenant BattleNet isn't specified, it can be inferred that the information we have access to is just the immediate tactical stuff. I think it's dumb that a technologically advanced galactic military isn't encrypting their comms, and it seems the only reason they're doing that is so Cortana can access information whenever the plot needs to deliver exposition. And Cortana will only access this information when it's dramatically the right time to do so. My overall point about how the plot uses Cortana's ability still stands, just for slightly different reasons than I initially presented. It would be one thing if she had to manually access the BattleNet at a computer terminal or something, meaning she could only collect information while she was there. But she's just accessing it like she's opening another tab on her computer. She could use this incredibly powerful ability at any time, but will naturally only do so when the plot deems it convenient. Anyway, apparently Halo has some kind of control room. Key says that they will have to find this control room before the Covenant, and immediately picks up a needler. Good choice, Captain. Now there's a man who knows how to handle his weapon. Wait, no, don't clip that out of context. Hang on a moment. Now there's a man who knows how to handle his weapon. You can clip that one. We have to fight our way back to the bridge. Keyes can actually die here, and if he does so, it's an instant game over. We make it back to the bridge and the Marine is dead. Looks like there's been a murder. I wonder who done it, Detective. Those cloaked elites caught on the terrain look mighty suspicious. I think we need to ask them a few questions.
We made it.
Good job, Detective. Another mystery solved. Cortana calls Echo 419 to come and extract us with a pelican. How exactly we're going to get a pelican in this completely enclosed room is never brought up, as 419 is being harassed by enemy air units and can't pick us up anyway. Fortunately, Keyes somehow knows how to pilot a Covenant dropship, so we hijack one from the docking bay. On the way out, Keyes rams a couple of hunters for good measure. Was that necessary? No. Could it have ended with the ship crashing and burning? Yes. Was it awesome anyway? Absolutely. We fly off and begin the search for the Halo control room. Jump forward in time and we're storming Normandy Beach with our Marine buddies. The reason we're here in northern France is to find the Silent Cartographer, which is a map that should lead us to the Halo control room. The following sequence has us fighting up the beach alongside a large squad of Marines to establish a foothold. I think this is one of the most iconic moments of the original game because of its sense of scale. My favourite moments in this game are when you're fighting alongside other Marines, because it sells the fact that this is a war and not a one-man crusade. Halo started development as a real-time strategy game, and some of the DNA of that genre still remains in the final product. I wouldn't be surprised if these larger scale battles were influenced by the RTS origins, and in turn partially responsible for what made Halo so unique to play. Afterwards, we get an Amazon drone delivery of a Warthog, and we leave the majority of the Marines behind on the beach. I understand that this means you can come back for reinforcements if the Marines that do tag along either die or get mysteriously stuck on the terrain, and perhaps there are technical limitations to prevent what I'm going to say next from being possible, but I wish 2 or 3 Warthogs were delivered here, and we form a convoy of gung-ho soldiers who allegedly know how to drive. Nevertheless, the return of the Warthog is cool because it gives us a chance to see how our driving skills have really improved. The Warthog also allows us to navigate the island quickly, as the structure of the first part of the level is unique. The island we're on has several distinct locations, including a couple of optional areas. Most players will go to this facility first, which is the entrance to the island interior, before realizing they have to find a control terminal to actually open the door. That terminal is in the center of the island and is guarded by 2 sets of hunters. These are the first hunters you have to fight without significant help from the allies. I found that the best way to deal with them was to get in melee range and to bait out their melee attacks. I then dodged their attacks. Before shooting them from behind. It's certainly daunting staring down a hulking giant, but it's not too difficult once you get the hang of it. The alternative is that they blast you from range with their fuel rod cannon, which, trust me, is much worse. I really like the second encounter with the hunters in this level then, because it puts you in a small room with them. This basically forces the player to get in close and bait out the melee attack. It's another subtle tutorial and excellent level design. An optional area has you investigate the wreck of a pelican taken down by Covenant forces. Here you'll find a rocket launcher which you can pick up. When I said that baiting out a melee attack was the best way to deal with hunters, yeah, scratch that. We then descend into the island's interior. Chief stumbles upon a vast chasm and kicks a plasma pistol down it. We don't hear it hit the ground, which confirms it's a long way down if our eyes hadn't done that already. We fight through tight corridors against densely packed squadrons of enemies. So far, the campaign has had a good mixture of combat sequences in open and enclosed spaces, and the variety of encounters helps prevent the player from getting bored or the shooting from getting monotonous. At one point, I fire a rocket launcher at a hunter, who survives before leaping at me from the smoke, which was simultaneously awesome and terrifying. We fight our way to the cartographer, which Cortana accesses. She finds the control room and says it's located there, which is helpful. She elaborates by saying it's in some kind of shrine, which is interesting, but some directions or coordinates would have been more useful. We try to contact Captain Keyes, but he's gone dark for some reason. I swear we spend half the game looking for this guy. Dude needs to have his Snapchat GPS turned on or something. What's worse is that earlier we got reports of a Covenant counter-offensive on the beach, and the Marines are going to give their lives holding them off for long enough so we can find a cartographer. What absolute heroes. If I ever learned their names, I'd be sure to remember them. We fight our way back up through the structure. Before we exit, we get one more surprise in the form of this energy sword wielding elite. He's a tough enemy, and it's going to take a lot of brain power to bring him down. We get on board a pelican which flies us deep underground. The pilot seems uneasy flying in like this, but Cortana calms her by saying the Covenant would never expect an aerial assault from underground. I mean, the Covenant also probably got here by dropship, but no one needs to worry about that right now. This next level, Assault on the Control Room, is probably my least favourite of the levels so far, particularly in contrast to the last level, which was excellent. I know the title and framing of this video implies that I'm going to be primarily praising the game, and yeah, most of my comments thus far have been positive and will continue to be, but that doesn't mean I think the campaign is perfect, far from it. And by analysing the shortcomings, I think we can really hone in on what makes a good Halo campaign. If you've played the next level, then you probably know what's coming next. This level is long, and not particularly varied. In the previous level, I commented on how the game has had a variety of combat encounters, and how that's been one of the game's biggest positives so far. The Assault on the Control Room reuses this particular atrium building a lot, and the combat encounters within them are very samey. Nothing so far has made me recognise the strengths of having varied combat encounters, quite like seeing that variety taken away. Which is not to say that this level has zero variety. In fact, taken as a whole, this level arguably has just as much variety as the levels that came before. However, because this level is also much longer than those previous levels, it reuses a lot of encounter types, and as such, feels more monotonous than the previous levels. This level could have benefited from just being a bit shorter, focusing on what made this level fun, and then ending before it outstays its welcome. Because there is fun to be had here. Whilst these atriums are reused, they are good to fight through in their own right. These sections where you have to fight across bridges are developed as the level goes on. At first, you just have the bridge you're on to worry about, but later sections will have adjacent bridges, with hunters firing fuel rod cannons at you as you progress. It really forces you to think about your positioning to ensure you don't get blindsided by plasma. Partway through the level, you will get to drive a Scorpion tank. It's a slow-moving vehicle which fires explosive barrels that one-shots almost everything it hits. Grunts? Gone. Enemy vehicles? Easy pickings. Covenant heavy tanks? Better rethink that heavy classification. It's an excellent vehicle that gives you a thrilling rush of power, and considering some of this level's combat encounters have been quite difficult, being able to suddenly demolish everything feels great, and also injects the level with some much needed variety. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this is my favourite section of the level. But it's not the only vehicle we get. We can pilot a Covenant Ghost, a fast-moving hoverbike that's armed with a deceptively powerful pair of plasma guns. Later games would give the Ghost a boost function which would complete the vehicle. Here it's okay. Towards the end of this level, we can also pilot a Banshee if we're quick enough and get to it before the Elite does. Like the Ghost, the Banshee will get buffed in later games with boost and aileron-roll capabilities. So honestly, here I found it to not be that effective. That's just my personal opinion though, compared to the rest of this video, which has featured none of my opinions and is full of objective facts. Like the video if you agree with me, like the video if you don't. Towards the end of the level, we move through this large structure, which despite having Covenant defenses set up, features precisely 0 Covenant. It's honestly quite eerie. Maybe they were all on a lunch break? We open this door and find a bunch of enemies, including this Elite who literally slaps me and I die. Second time round I use the gun turret to take most of them out. But something curious happens with the Sword Elite. The AI of this game has been pretty good on the whole, but there have been occasional oddities. The most notable have been with the Sword Elites, who will sometimes just stand behind an object and let you shoot them to death. Now, I think what's going on here is that the Elite enemy types are programmed to sometimes take cover if it's available, and if the Elite is armed with a gun, that works fine. But if the Elite is armed with a melee weapon, they end up just letting me shoot them to death. We finally reach the control room and plug Cortana into the mainframe. She's ecstatic, a little bit too happy to be plugged into a supercomputer. I've seen Terminator, I know what happens next. She loves the wealth of knowledge she's just gained, and Master Chief is about as impressed as my parents were when they saw my exam results. All he wants to know is how humanity can use Halo against the Covenant. But then, Cortana's mood changes. She says the Covenant have found something, and they're terrified of it. She doesn't say what they've found because it's urgent and important, and therefore there's no time to explain. She tells Chief that Keys must be stopped because the weapon cache he's looking for isn't what he thinks it is. Master Chief is so alarmed that he sprints away like he's playing Halo 4, leaving Cortana unattended in the control room. Can she be forcibly ejected from it? What if a Covenant grunt wanders in and takes her away? So much for not giving away the location of Earth. If it wasn't clear, I think this is another moment where things happen because the plot demands them to. This becomes very clear with the context of future events. But even without that context, it is strange that if something grave is occurring, that Chief wouldn't grab Cortana so she could explain what was happening whilst they run to meet with Keys. Still, having Cortana explain everything would ruin the tension of the next level, and so the writers needed a way to have the all-knowing AI removed from the picture for that level to work. The solution they came up with wasn't graceful, to say the least. One last tangent before we move on to the next level. Cortana mentioned earlier that she wondered if the Halo ring was deliberately programmed to have inclement snowy weather, or if their weather control system had malfunctioned, which feels like the developers' way of saying they wanted to add a snow level because they wanted to add a snow level, which is fair enough. We take a Pelican alone to Keys' last reported location, which turns out to be on the movie set for the latest Predator movie. This is my favourite environment in the game. The dense foliage looks distinctive, its twisted design causing the entire forest to fall into the uncanny valley between recognisable and alien. It's unnerving, which fits this level well. My only complaint is that we only spend a short time here, which is a shame. We encounter the Covenant, but they're not defending any position. Instead, they seem to be running away from something, though it's unclear what. We find a facility, and Covenant are fleeing from what appears to be UNSC gunfire. However, upon looking in the building, there's nobody present. Weird. But what's weirder is the absence of elites. Descending deeper into the facility, we find more Covenant forces, though they're sparsely arranged. There's also some dead Covenant who died particularly gruesome deaths, but we're not the ones who killed them. I swear, officer, it wasn't me. There's this glass installation that looks like some kind of observation or prison cell. Thing is, it's broken, which means whatever was on the inside isn't there now. Not only that, but there's this panicked Marine who shoots us as we enter. Taking some cover, we can hear him raving about how the others were taken away by the monsters. Now, this might just be me, but I'm starting to suspect there's more than just Covenant going on here. Finally, we see a discarded helmet from a soldier named Jenkins, which isn't surprising. The name Jenkins just screams, "I'm going to die in a war movie." We plug his helmet's data into ours and start watching his content warning Let's Play. The footage is a bit corrupted, as the Marines seem to blip all over the place. We see them retrace the same steps we did, but notably they come across an elite who looks like he's had his insides scrambled, potentially by some kind of plasma weapon. Captain Keyes is here as well, doing his Gandalf act of disappearing and reappearing precisely when he is needed. They descend into the room we're in now, when suddenly these weird creatures flood into the room and swarm them. Jenkins gets mobbed, and the footage cuts to black. Okay, so I have issues with this recording. I get that it's trying to build up the tension to the reveal of the flood, but the level has done an excellent job of doing that already. By taking us back to the beginning, and following the Marines' journey through the same rooms we've already travelled through, the tension is reset, which is disappointing. The entire recording is 4 minutes long, more than long enough to completely deflate the tension. I also think seeing the flood swarm them at the end gives the monster away too early. Their reveal would have been more impactful if our first encounter with them was a first-hand gameplay section. Which is not to say the recording should be cut completely. The scene with the dead elite adds information and intrigue that we didn't already have. I genuinely think this entire recording would be better if it started with the scene of the elite, then played out until the encounter with the flood. But instead of seeing them all get swarmed, Jenkins gets jumped from behind by an infection before it cuts to black. Enough to go, what the fuck was that, without giving the game away. Recording notwithstanding, this entire section has been masterful. From the odd deployments of the Covenant through to the panicked Marine, the mystery, intrigue and tension has been built up excellently, which makes the fumbling of the flood's reveal even more disappointing. I mentioned earlier that I liked the cartoony tone of the game's writing, because it gave Halo a distinctive tonal identity. Well, I'm sorry, Your Honor, but that's not the whole truth. I also liked it because this level changes the light-hearted tone into something much more horrific. Everyone is panicking and it's unclear why. There's UNSC weapons fire, but seemingly no UNSC firing them. A group of grunts hold themselves up in a room and now everyone is dead. This horrific tone is more noticeable and effective because it contrasts with what came before. The shift isn't jarring though, and I think the reason for that is because it's still melodramatic. Beforehand, it was a melodramatic war film with hoorah Marines, and now it's a melodramatic zombie film. This melodramatic angle helps marry the two tones together and prevents it from feeling messy. Anyway, mere seconds later, we're greeted by the flood, who come barging through the door. These little dudes are called infections, but I'm going to call them crabs. These crabs take over other life forms, infecting them with spores and turning them into flood life forms. Because we're wearing power armor, they can't easily infect us though, and as such are easily taken out with a couple of bullets or a well-timed melee. Not long afterwards, infected elites charge on in. They're quite bulky, can jump very high, and have a strong melee attack. They're also resistant to melee themselves, which is unfortunate for me, because I've been playing this so far like it's a first-person puncher. The flood constantly rush your position, so you have to be constantly on the move, retreating whilst firing to effectively take them out. At least, until you go around the corner and find the shotgun. The shotgun does a lot of damage at close range, which makes it very effective at dealing with enemies that like to rush you, such as the flood. The shotgun is a contender for my favourite weapon, and whilst I used it sparingly in this level, it did become my primary weapon of choice in the next one. It's not just elites who have been infected, Marines have as well, and these infected Marines have armed themselves with both UNSC and Covenant weaponry. This means you can't mindlessly run away from the flood whilst you shoot them. Now you have to pay attention to your positioning to make sure you don't get touchy-feely with a plasma bolt. Overall, I really like this level. The tension is built up nicely, and the combat encounters with the flood are gradually developed as the level progresses. The level also makes effective use of enemy placement to guide you to your next destination. Forerunner structures are samey design-wise, with a lot of copy and pasted rooms, and this means getting lost is a very real possibility. The previous level literally had glowing blue arrows on the floor to point the way to the control room and prevent you from getting lost. But this level had enemies situated around doors you needed to go through, which I thought was a much cleverer solution. The only time I got lost is when the game required you to platform up conveniently stacked debris in a different room in order to progress. This is my only critique with the level layout itself. I think a ramp or stairs would have been more noticeable and done the job just as well. At the end of the level, we will see a large squad of Marines, or as we should call them, food for the Flood. Fohammer tells us if we can make it to a tower a few hundred meters away, she can come and pick us up. The only catch is that the area between here and there is swarming with Flood. Marines don't have power armor, and as such are very susceptible to being infected. The following battle was a bloodbath. Try as I might, I couldn't prevent the Marines from T-posing to death. I was the only one to make it to the tower, and when I did so, I was greeted by one of Aperture Science's AI cores. His name is 343 Guilty Spark, and he says it's his responsibility to deal with the Flood outbreak. However, he needs our help, and before we can ask why, he immediately teleports us away, and we end up in a place called the library. Guilty Spark informs us we're here to get something called the Index, before flying off towards it. We follow along and are immediately assailed by large amounts of Flood. Not that Guilty Spark seems all too bothered that we're fighting for our life, as he's singing and laughing away like he's a character in a From Software game.
I am a genius.
The Flood introduce a new variant, these Flood pods which explode into crabs when they get near you. The explosion does a lot of damage, both to you and nearby enemies. I don't have any problem with the enemy type itself, but I do have a problem with how the game will sometimes put the enemy around sharp blind corners, leading to surprise explosions. It's the only time I ever thought enemy placement in Halo was obnoxious. I want to actually take a moment to talk about enemy AI, not so much from a combat perspective, but rather in how the different enemy behaviours add character to the campaign. Grunts are the most obvious example. The majority of them will flee in terror and try to regroup if their elite overseer has been killed. But what's cool is that they don't always do this. Sometimes they stand and fight. Sometimes they'll throw a plasma grenade at point blank range. There is a variety in enemy behaviour, which adds a degree of individuality to every grunt I brutally murder. The same could be said for the elites. Some will charge at you whilst others take cover. Even if that sometimes leads to janky moments with melee enemies, it's broadly a fun feature. The Flood, meanwhile, will charge at you relentlessly, swarming your position and overwhelming you with sheer numbers. Their battle tactics are completely different to the Covenant's more even-handed approach, and this difference in AI goes a long way to making the Flood feel like a distinctive faction and not just a zombie recolor for the Covenant. Their AI does make them more one-note to fight when compared to the Covenant, but when used in short bursts or in tandem with the Covenant, this is completely fine. However, if, hypothetically, there was a long level where you fought nothing but several waves of Flood in copy and pasted environments, with the objective of holding your position until a door opens, being reused several times, then that would probably be my least favourite level in the game. Unfortunately for me, the library ticks all of those boxes. Every critique I had for Assault on the Control Room applies here, but magnified several times over. The core gunplay of Halo is fun, so at no point do I feel like I'm having a miserable time, but it's a far cry from the cooler moments we've had in levels past. Guilty Spark will spout some exposition on how the Flood works, but it's genuinely kind of hard to focus on what he's saying when you're being assaulted by would-be murderers every 2 seconds. This isn't a problem that's unique to the library, and you could perhaps make the argument that it kinda adds to this sort of detached, aloof character that Guilty Spark 343 has. But some of Cortana's dialogue can be overshadowed by this gunplay too, which is more of a problem. The level wasn't without its redeeming qualities though. At certain points you will be joined by a platoon of sentinels, floating automatons that absolutely melt the Flood. These sections add much needed variety to the level's otherwise monotonous structure. I think the library proves by omission that a Halo level is at its best when it's bursting with variety, both in the design of the enemies and the combat encounters. Take that away and, well, you have a level like the library. The gunplay means that the game is still fun to play, but if every level was structured like the library, then Halo would not be the memorable franchise that it became. Eventually, we get to the core of the library and retrieve the index, at which point Guilty Spark teleports us back to the control room. Guilty Spark says that Protocol prevents him from reunifying the index with the core, and that such a task is reserved for us, whom he calls a Reclaimer. The term Reclaimer isn't really elaborated on here, but its significance is expanded upon in later games and accompanying media. We reunify the index, and it seems something is powering up. Until it doesn't. Turns out Cortana has prevented us from activating the Halo ring. I really like the following exchange between Cortana and Guilty Spark. The two of them seem to genuinely hate each other, and the way they talk is very characterful. Guilty Spark is quite dignified in how he speaks, but is also aloof and detached. He's been programmed to follow protocol, and doing anything outside of that is inconceivable to him. Cortana, meanwhile, is more informal, more sassy, and seeing her attack the dogmatic Guilty Spark really highlights her humanity. Master Chief seems to be under the impression that what we're doing is activating Halo's defenses to kill the Flood, but Cortana reveals that the ring actually kills the Flood's food, i.e., all sentient life in the galaxy, in order to starve them out. Last I checked, sentient life included humanity, even if politicians sometimes call that sentience into question. Guilty Spark doesn't deny this, going so far as to correct her on a technicality, and seems to be under the impression that we already knew this. Again, what he says next does wonders to characterize him. He starts speaking to us as if we've met before, referencing interactions that we haven't had. The Forerunners likely programmed him for a specific eventuality, an eventuality where Reclaimers were aware of who they were and what Halo did. However, for whatever reason, that eventuality hasn't come to pass, and Guilty Spark seems incapable of perceiving this. This scene is oozing with excellent character work. We retrieve Cortana, who still holds the index. Guilty Spark demands we hand her over, and we politely decline. He orders the Sentinels to kill us, and thus begins 2 Betrayals. We start with a plasma pistol, whose charge shot is super effective against the Sentinels, taking them out easily. This level will feature Covenant, Flood, and the Sentinels all together, and they will battle amongst themselves just as much as they will fight you. This leads to some pretty chaotic encounters, which reflects the chaos of the current situation. It's great. Cortana says that there are 3 generators that are essential to operating the Halo installation, and we should go and shut them down. To do that, we fly a Banshee to each generator with all the grace of a dead swan. Once at a generator, Cortana says that she's repurposed our shields to act as an EMP. All we have to do is step into the generator, and the EMP will do the rest. One catch, this disables our shields until they can recharge. And wouldn't you know, a bunch of enemies heard her say that, because they wait for us to lose our shields before jumping us. At the first generator, it's a bunch of Sentinels, and at the second, a large wave of Flood. On reaching the 3rd generator, the level ends immediately after you activate the EMP, meaning there's no more enemies to fight once you get there. Beyond that, there's not too much to say about this level. A lot of the level is reused from Assault on the Control Room, and because that level was already quite long, spending even more time here is quite noticeable. However, the abundance of 3-way encounters against multiple factions does help prevent this retreading of old ground from becoming boring. There is this one fight where you have to go up against 2 Wraiths, several Flood, 2 of which have rocket launchers, a large contingent of Covenant, with powerful elites and 2 Hunters all at once, and I'm going to be honest, I found it very difficult. I think you're meant to just hop into a Banshee and fly away, but my Master Chief has a no alien left alive policy, so I decided to fight through everything, and it was the most difficult fight in the game. I'd argue it's perhaps a little overtuned, but I get that you can just hop in the Banshee and flee, so I'm going to reserve judgment. During the level, Cortana mentioned that one way to permanently destroy the ring would be to blow up the Pillar of Autumn's fusion core. For that though, we would need Captain Keyes, or rather glibly, his neural implants if Keyes is dead, in order to authorize the explosion. At the end of the level, Cortana reveals that she conveniently learned how to teleport people, and suggests that we teleport to Keyes' last known location. She also conveniently says that because it requires a lot of energy which she gets from Chief's shields, that they should only try it once, which means the writers don't have to worry about the power of teleportation ruining a hypothetical situation in which Chief has to escape from an exploding ship in under 6 minutes. It's not a plot hole, it's just very convenient. Anyway, they teleport to a Covenant cruiser, which has been overrun by Flood. The Covenant have sent in a strike team to neutralize the Flood before they can use the cruiser to escape from Halo. More importantly for us though, Keyes' transponder is active for once in his life, and for now, he seems to be alive. We teleport aboard the ship and come in upside down. Cortana says she was meant to input the coordinates differently, and an annoyed Chief bonks his own helmet to get her to focus. It's a great little moment. I wish we got a few more character moments like this one. Not too many that it becomes tedious, but just a few more moments that shed more light on Chief and Cortana's dynamic. We then proceed down the corridors of the Covenant cruiser, and are quickly faced with a large green pit dripping with bright green liquid. Cortana says we should look elsewhere, and so naturally I thought you had to turn back and find another way around. But it turns out you're meant to jump into the pit to proceed, which is incredibly counterintuitive. Since when, in any video game with fall damage, do you want to dive into the bright green liquid? The answer is 2001 with the original release of Halo, and never again since. A bizarre bit of level design. That notwithstanding, I actually really like this level overall. Setting the level on both the inside and the outside of the cruiser helps prevent any one environment getting stale, and the encounter design really shows the Covenant's desperation in the face of the Flood. They're completely surrounded and often vastly outnumbered, but are still fighting tooth and nail to survive. The only time Covenant aren't vastly outnumbered by the Flood are when these high-tier Covenant clad in black are strolling around, which subtly tells the player that these Covenants are incredibly powerful, in case the plasma grenade to the face hadn't told you that already. In summary, the environmental storytelling here is top-notch. Another top-notch moment is when a grunt threw a grenade onto a crab whilst the crab was running at me. Not only was it really funny, but an excellent demonstration of how Halo systems can interact with each other organically to create new threats that you have to react to. Partway through the level we find Captain Keyes, or what remains of Captain Keyes, as he's been turned into a Flood organism of some description. It's not actually completely clear what, and I think the ambiguity actually adds to its disturbing nature. It's gross. I love it. We rip out Keyes' neural thingamajigs and now have to fight our way off the ship. We fight back to the hangar and have to get from the top floor to the parked Banshees at the bottom. You can actually jump onto this dropship to get down to the second floor, and the corridor that you take to the first floor can be cleared of enemies earlier in the level if you explore, making the descent super simple. Hey, maybe if we hadn't spent several minutes shooting random enemies in random corridors, we would have got to Keyes in time to save him from becoming a mushroom man. Nah, probably not. We hop in the Banshee and fly off towards the final level of the game. The more begins with us flying the Banshee towards the ruins of the Pillar of Autumn, now teetering off the edge of a cliff like it's the bus from the Italian Job. Cortana says the Banshee won't be able to make it, but Master Chief is confident in his piloting abilities. If the previous gameplay sections are anything to go by, his confidence is sorely misplaced. Sure enough, the Banshee crashes into the wall and Master Chief dies. Or so it seems. As Cortana quips, "You did that on purpose, didn't you?" Master Chief doesn't reply, which leads me to believe that he did not in fact do that on purpose and is currently shitting his pants. This level takes place in the corridors of the Pillar of Autumn, the same corridors we ran through in the first level. Seeing these corridors full of the hardest enemies of the game is a great way of showing how far the player's skills have developed. Not very far at all. We fight our way to the bridge to start the self-destruct sequence. Cortana makes a joke here about how you leave a place unattended for 5 minutes, which given how many people have died or been mutated into horrific zombies is incredibly insensitive. We begin the self-destruct sequence, but then Guilty Spark appears and plays his Uno reverse card, stopping it. Cortana doesn't know what to do, but Chief then brings up the idea of blowing the engines manually. This leads to this shot of him lightly juggling a grenade, and even though we can't see through his helmet, you can tell he has the biggest smile on his face. The defining fights of this level for me are when you enter a corridor and there's Covenant on one end and another faction on the other. Not only are these fights incredibly chaotic, they give you many tactical options on who to take down first. It's incredibly satisfying to be the lone survivor of a close quarters encounter against 3 different galactic civilizations. After all, we're the Master Chief, and no matter what the galaxy throws at us, we will always come out on top. Most of the time. We make it to the engine room and have to blow up 4 engines with either a rocket launcher or grenades. Here's the catch. The engines will sporadically be covered with a grate that will block the rocket, meaning you have to time your explosives so they don't get blocked. This is actually more clearly conveyed to the player in the original graphics, where the cover was a full door that was also a similar grey colour to the walls of the ship. With the anniversary graphics, the cover is kind of orange, similar to the orange of the exhaust, which means if you're not looking closely, you may fail to recognise that there's any cover there at all. The first rocket I fired blew up an engine immediately, whereas the second one hit a cover, but because of the colour similarity, I was initially confused why one engine required 1 rocket to blow up and the other required 2. It didn't take me too long to figure out what was going on, but it's an important lesson for remastering graphics. Always ensure mechanical clarity isn't lost during the beautification process. With my final rocket, I'm able to blow up the final engine, and Cortana gives us the all clear to get the hell out of there. She calls in Fohammer to come pick us up, before telling us that in 6 minutes' time, the ship's core will explode with a temperature of 10 million degrees Celsius, which for my American viewers is roughly 10 million degrees Fahrenheit. A toasty California summer. Luckily for us, we get to use a Warthog, and what follows is an obstacle course to make it to the evac zone. It's bombastic, it's suitably cheesy, and a distinctly unique way to end a first-person shooter. We make it to the evac zone and see Fohammer approach. Unfortunately, they're accompanied by 2 friendly Banshees, who lovingly shoot her out of the sky. This really is Everyone Dies, the video game, isn't it? Cortana says there's a single longsword fighter ship docked about 1 kilometer away, potentially the same longsword we saw all the way back at the beginning of the game. The main theme kicks in as we drive the final stretch, which is awesome. What's not so awesome is that if you, hypothetically, die right at the end of the sequence, you get taken all the way back to the beginning and have to do the entire obstacle course again. This problem is confounded by the fact that at the end of the level, there's a small on-foot section featuring the toughest tier of elites, which is the only section where you could realistically die unless you're going out of your way to do so. I understand that checkpointing a time sequence is difficult, but I feel they could have put a checkpoint after Fohammer explodes and set the timer to 3 minutes. That way, you wouldn't have to do the whole thing again if you died right at the end. Like, I definitely didn't. Anyway, as I am a professional gamer, I make it to the longsword on my first attempt. Master Chief flies off just as the Pillar of Autumn explodes, causing a chain reaction that completely destroys the Halo ring. Chief asks if anyone else made it out, and Cortana says there's only dust and echoes. Oh, thank God, those 2 are my favourite squad mates. I came to a realisation in this final scene. Most superheroes are very good at saving people, but Chief is a different kind of hero. The Spartans are very good at killing the enemy, which in this case saves humanity as a species, but very rarely do we see Chief directly save an individual's life. The only example I can think of is Keyes in Truth and Reconciliation, and a lot of other people died to save him. Maybe also this Marine in the first mission, though he doesn't last very long. It's a take on the superhero that, whilst not completely unique to Halo, does nevertheless add to Halo's distinctive identity. Cortana says that it's finished, but Master Chief reckons a sequel to this game is likely, maybe even a franchise. He takes his helmet off, but his face is obscured by the ship's hull. Sorry Paramount fans, no Master Chiefs today. The camera scrolls up, and the credits roll. Or they would, if I wasn't playing the Master Chief Collection. Instead, I just go back to the main menu. So when I went back to replay Halo for this video, I reckon the reason I remembered it so well would be a combination of the story and the gameplay physics. But speaking honestly, whilst the story isn't bad, it is pretty generic video game fare. There isn't really any character growth to speak of, and whilst the setting and expanded lore is really interesting, the events that actually play out in the game are fine, if not occasionally contrived. The story's biggest strength is how it shows things getting worse and worse. Halo and Truth and Reconciliation both end in a clear victory for the UNSC. The Silent Cartographer does too, but at a greater human cost. But by the time the Flood are released, the UNSC are losing troops left and right, and are nowhere to be seen in the game's final act. Despite being filled with hurrah marines and colourful enemies with very punchable faces, the structure of Halo's story somehow manages to be a tragedy. Notably, Halo Reach would improve on this tragic structure for its campaign, but it can be seen all the way back in Combat Evolved. A fun, bombastic tragedy sounds like it shouldn't work, but because it's all delivered with a similar sense of melodrama, Halo pulls it off with flying colours and is all the more unique for it. In my opinion, the game's main theme helps reinforce this point. The music in Halo is generally excellent, but I want to take a minute to discuss the main theme specifically. Now, I'm not 8-bit music theory, so I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but the theme opens with an iconic male choir. Before transitioning to a more traditional heroic theme. But at the end of that heroic theme, the male choir is reprised. To me, this entire theme sounds like a requiem, a song honouring the dead, remembering the Marines' heroism and memorialising their passing. Considering the UNSC survival rate in this game is almost 0%, it's an incredibly apt compositional choice. There's a lot of supporting details that indirectly support the game's story. Grunts will have contextual bits of dialogue depending on what's happening. Enemy troop movements are often given tactical context. The entire opening of 343 Guilty Spark does a lot of storytelling with very little dialogue. This attention to detail does wonders to immerse the player in the setting of Halo. The story could have been complete bollocks, and this immersion would have still made it memorable. Pair this level of detail and immersion with a decent story, and it's no wonder Halo became Xbox's flagship series. As for the gameplay, the gunplay is solid, but that alone doesn't make it amazing. Rather, I think it's the interplay between the physics engine, the environmental objects, and the weapons which make the game memorable. Achievement Hunter's Fails of the Week would not have been as popular as it was if this interplay wasn't so entertaining, even if the loose physics engine sometimes led to janky moments. But that same looseness meant that unique, memorable moments such as this danger crab could happen, moments which you would want to tell your friends about in the school playground. The game isn't perfect, and some levels are definitely better than others, but when you think back on the campaign, is your first thought fighting through the library? Or is it you and your UNSC buddies boarding a Covenant cruiser, storming the beach of the Silent Cartographer, or fighting intense close quarters combat aboard the Autumn? I could go on, but ultimately, everything that I've described in this video gave Halo an incredibly distinct identity, particularly in 2001, a sci-fi tragedy with explosions, genocidal aliens, and a zombie apocalypse. How many games can claim to do that? I can think of one. And that is why I think Halo is so uniquely memorable. Hello again. It is time for the post-video ramble. The part of the video you all tune out for. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, maybe, just maybe, click like and subscribe. I found the writing process for this video to actually be quite dense. I was actually a little worried that I wouldn't have too much to say, but 12,750 words later, and here we are. I think this video is less jokey than the last couple I've done, but I hope it's still fun to watch nevertheless. Maybe I'll do a Halo 2 video next. Depends on whether or not this one does well, and whether or not the Halo 2 video would just be me saying all of the same stuff I've said in this video. So we'll see. I also genuinely want to do a serious analysis of Garfield Kart at some point, if for no other reason to justify the 89 pence that I spent on that game, and, you know, because I think it'd be funny. So, maybe tune in, maybe subscribe. Jeez, can you tell I'm not quite reading from a script? I've got notes, but not a script for this bit. I can. Anyway. I'm sure that it's probably enough time to have the credits fly by, so I'm going to go back to watching a decade-old series of Halo fails from a company that doesn't exist anymore. Until next time, bye-bye. You know, if I had a nickel for every Italian job reference in this video, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it is strange that it happened twice.